Sometimes in life, you embrace an idea that makes all the sense in the world to you, only to discover that the rest of the world is not yet ready for that future. But if this idea is a good one, you'll find that you're not alone. There will be others who are also thinking long term and straying from the safety of the herd of the intellectual status quo. There will be others thinking outside the box for all the right reasons. You have to lean in and support common efforts with those people because every once in a while, they can actually help make the idea into a reality. Welcome to that era in crypto where we actually have friends. Ready?
Yeehaw! Let's go!
Today, we are going to discuss the Responsible Financial Innovation Act from Senators Lummis and Gillibrand. And I have to say, this bill is pretty much everything we thought it would be. It truly is a comprehensive crypto regulatory framework. It addresses everything, seemingly everything. It's going to generate a lot of conversation. It's a big bill, so there are going to be things in this bill that people don't like. There are going to be a lot of things that people like. Even if it doesn't pass, even if it doesn't have a chance of even getting any traction toward passing, this is going to start the conversation. If you're like me and you've never been more hopeful for the regulatory future of crypto because of what these two senators just did, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. I keep saying it, but we've just had two amazing epics. We were supposed to mint 10.3 blocks and 10.1 blocks. We actually minted 13 and 17. We've had outrageous luck these last two epics. So come on over to the Army of Spies stake pool. Here it is, guys. Senator Cynthia Lummis letting us know. Today, I'm introducing the Responsible Financial Innovation Act alongside Senator Gillibrand. The United States is the global financial leader, and it's absolutely critical the U.S. plays a leading role in this new frontier. I know a lot of the listeners of this podcast, watchers of these videos, aren't in the U.S., but I think as far as the interests of the U.S. go, she is exactly right. If the U.S. wants to maintain its position as a global financial leader, wherever you think we fit in the global financial puzzle, if they want to maintain that position, it is absolutely critical that they're at the front of the crypto revolution. If they fall behind in crypto, they're not going to be able to maintain whatever position you think they hold in the global financial framework. I think Senator Lummis is exactly right about why this is so critical for the US. First off, let's talk about who's actually supporting this. Who actually likes this? Turns out a lot of people in crypto are in favor of this bill. We've got the Digital Chamber of Commerce. We've got the Association for Digital Asset Markets. We've got the Blockchain Association. We've got the Crypto Council for Innovation. Kraken is in favor. Coinbase is in favor. FTX is in favor. Bitstamp is in favor. Former chairman of the CFTC, which will be pretty important as we go through the bill, Christopher Giancarlo, who was very cognizant of crypto while he was chairman of the CFTC, and of course, Input Output Global. We've got a quote here from Charles. Input Output Global applauds the efforts by Congress, including Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand, in trying to bring regulatory clarity for the cryptocurrency and blockchain industry in order to ensure America's competitiveness and long-term security. It looks like Charles is also keyed in on what I think is so important for the U.S. about this bill being introduced. And we'll talk about what that actually means in just a little bit. Uniswap also supports it. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people in crypto. When this many exchanges support it, but you've also got all of the trade associations of crypto supporting it. You've also got, entities like Uniswap and IOG supporting it. All of these different actors in the crypto ecosystem, might have different agendas, different needs, different goals. They all support this bill. Okay, here's the bill. Let's get this out of the way right at the start. This thing is probably not going to pass, at least not in this form. This PDF right here, probably not going to end up becoming law. There are a lot of reasons for that. But the important thing is this is going to start the conversation. This is the first real comprehensive regulatory framework we've had for crypto. And it, like I said earlier, it's a big bill. This is like 70 pages long. This version is 69 pages long. There are going to be things in here that people won't like, both in Cardano, outside Cardano, any subset of crypto. There are going to be things in here that people won't like necessarily, but there are a lot of things that people are going to like, and there are some really big issue framing policies presented in this bill that are going to set the tone for the conversation. They're setting the frame. They're framing this conversation, and the way they're framing it is as pro crypto as I could have ever hoped this could possibly be. So let's jump right into it. So we start off with some definitions. I think it's important in these kinds of gigantic frameworks. It's important that we have definition. It's important that the definitions for things are set out correctly right at the start. And they do a good job. They tell us what a digital asset is. It's a natively electronic asset that confers economic proprietary access rights or powers, is recorded using cryptographically secure distributed ledger technology or any similar analog, includes virtual currency and ancillary assets. We'll get into those later. Payment, stablecoins, other securities, and commodities. They tell us what a digital asset intermediary is. They tell us what distributed ledger technology is. I love, for some reason, that euphemism is stuck so hard. I think they figured out there were more different types of ledgers in crypto than just blockchain. So immediately they were like, okay, we're just going to call them distributed ledger technologies forever, no matter how much the rest of you call them blockchains. So they give us good definitions. There aren't any, glaring, obvious problems with these definitions, to start with. Then we move on to some other things that give you a little pause right at the start. Person who provides digital asset services. Wow, you're like, okay, this isn't a digital asset intermediary who you talked about up here. This is a person who provides digital asset services. That's pretty broad. That can include a lot of people, but they say specifically it means a digital asset intermediary, a financial institution, any other person conducting digital asset activities pursuant to a federal or state charter, license, registration, or other similar authorization, or a person who's required by law to hold such a license, registration, or other similar authorization. I think this kind of catch-all for anybody doing anything in crypto was always going to exist in these kind of broader overarching frameworks. And down the road, this could cause us some trouble. A lot could happen under this label, person who provides digital asset services, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, here's the definition that is maybe going to freak people out the most. And maybe they're correct to be freaked out. Maybe they're not. We probably won't know for a long time. But here's the definition. Virtual currency. They say a virtual currency means a digital asset. So they're telling you right there, this is a subset of digital asset. Virtual currencies are digital assets, but not all digital assets are virtual currencies. A virtual currency is used primarily as a medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value, or any combination of such functions. Full stop. Hold the bus here. So if you're in Cardano or Ethereum or basically any blockchain ecosystem that doesn't look a lot like Bitcoin without any substantial smart contracting going on, you have to ask the question, wait a second, is this just Bitcoin? Is this a special carve out, a special category just for Bitcoin? Does this apply to anything else at all? Well, as we go further down the definition, we see they also say it's not legal tender, does not derive value from or is backed by an underlying financial asset. So it can't be like Tether. Includes a digital asset consistent with subparagraph A that is accompanied by a statement from the issuer that a denominated or pegged value will be maintained and will be available upon redemption from the issuer or other identified person based solely on a smart contract. So this is obviously to include stable coins that are pegged to something like fiat, but are not backed by something like fiat. So the interesting part here, though, is they say that it can be based solely on a smart contract. So this will obviously make people think about algorithmic stablecoins. But I think more importantly, they're saying that you can have digital assets that have some smart contract capabilities and are also still virtual currencies. Of course, we have to worry down the road that Bitcoin maximalists or maximalists of other blockchains like that might argue, no, this means blockchain, digital assets of blockchains like Bitcoin, and also non-financial asset-backed stablecoins that may be based on a smart contract, but nothing else with smart contracts. Of course, that's what they're going to argue. So given that, I would be a lot more comfortable if there was something up in this section that said virtual currency means digital asset that is used primarily as a medium of exchange, whether or not it involves smart contracts, or whether or not it can interact with smart contracts, whether or not it has some smart contract capabilities. Something like that up in this section made me feel a lot better. The fact that they mention smart contracts at all in this section is a good sign. The fact that it's just with these non-financial asset backed stable coins, not quite as good. This is going to freak a lot of people out, though. A lot of people are going to say that this is the result of lobbying by Bitcoin maximalists, and it's meant to exclude every other blockchain. I'm not quite so fatalistic about it. I'm sure people will try to interpret it that way down the road, which is why I'd feel more comfortable if there was something up in here that mentioned smart contracts and sort of excluded smart contracts as an exclusionary factor from this definition of virtual currency. So whether or not such digital asset has smart contract capabilities or not, something like that. Getting to the big stuff, we've always had this big problem with, we have a lot of problems with taxation of crypto, but one of the biggest, most obvious ones that you figure out really early in your crypto journey is that we don't have a de minimis exception for day-to-day transactions. They have this in Japan and a lot of other jurisdictions. They say, hey, we want you to buy stuff like coffee with your crypto. This was a normal thing back when I got into Bitcoin back in that 2013, 2014 timeframe. It was fully expected that we'd be able to do things like buy coffee with Bitcoin. That was a very normal expectation. We all thought within a couple of years, we would be using Bitcoin for everything, all of our purchases. At least me and everybody else I knew who was holding Bitcoin back then, we all fully expected that. Then it became clear that the IRS was not going to provide any kind of de minimis exception. They weren't going to provide any threshold under which you could buy a cup of coffee and not have to calculate your gains on the Bitcoin you just spent from the time you acquired it to the time you bought the coffee. This presents a really big problem because nobody wants to buy coffee if they have to calculate taxes on the gains in the currency they use to buy the coffee. This section fixes that. The amount of gain or loss excluded from gross income under subsection A with respect to a disposition shall not exceed 200. And subsection A says gross income shall not include gain or loss from the disposition of virtual currency in a personal transaction for the purchase of goods or services. This is fantastic. We've needed this for a long time. It makes really good sense. If we're actually going to use crypto for commerce, we need a de minimis exception just like this. You're going to see people alternately quoting this threshold as $200 or $600. And that's because, as you can see in earlier versions of the bill, even ones that popped up on social media this morning, that number appeared as 600 in these earlier draft versions of the bill. But in the version that was actually released by the senators, and I'm sure the one they introduced in the Senate, the number is 200. Here's their attempt to fix the broker definition issue from the infrastructure bill. We covered that ad nauseum on this channel, so I won't rehash that. But their fix in the final version of the bill reads like this. Any person who for consideration stands ready in the ordinary course of a trade or business to effect sales of digital assets at the direction of their customers. That would be added to the definition of broker in this section of the IRS code. The original version that surfaced in the earlier drafts of the bill was stronger. The earlier version of the bill had this section looking like this. Nothing in this section shall be construed to create any inference that a person who's going to fit this definition of broker includes any person solely engaged in the business of validation, selling hardware or software wallets, or being a protocol developer. This, of course, is what we were pushing really hard for back during the infrastructure bill days. And I know Senator Lummis definitely, based on what she was saying at the time of the infrastructure bill, seemed to very, very strongly support these exceptions from the broker definition. It looks like in the final version of the bill, they probably just couldn't get enough support from whatever other parties they had to pre-negotiate with even before introducing this bill to get these specific exceptions in there. Instead, they just got that language that I read to you a moment ago. There's a section here on DAOs. It starts out by trying to make it easier for DAOs to fit into the 501c7 sort of nonprofit social club category if they're actually not doing anything commercial besides treasury management, including mining and staking of digital assets. But more importantly, it sort of sets the definition for a DAO as an organization which utilizes smart contracts to effectuate collective action for business, commercial, charitable, or similar event. Notice it can be charitable or business/commercial. So it utilizes smart contracts, governance of which is achieved primarily on a distributed basis and which is properly incorporated or organized under the laws of a state or foreign jurisdiction as a DAO, cooperative, foundation, or any similar entity. So obviously this is great for states like Wyoming that already have a full framework to sort of recognize DAOs on the same footing as like an LLC, and for that to be recognized by the federal government in this section here. Next up, they try to create a little preferential tax treatment for crypto loans. So there's a bunch of stuff in this crypto loan section, but we'll get to the most relevant part. It says here, Section 1058 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by adding at the end of the following new subsections. Securities. For purposes of this section, the term securities has the meaning given such term by Section 1236C, except that such term includes any digital aspect, and with respect to a digital asset does not require a call option. So what does Section 1058 do, you say? Here's Section 1058. It says, hey, if a taxpayer transfers securities pursuant to an agreement which meets the requirements of subsection B, which is just this subsection down here, no gain or loss shall be recognized on the exchange of such securities by the taxpayer for an obligation under such agreement. You're like, okay, great. Recognizing no gain or loss is something I definitely want. You come down here and read subsection B, and they're basically just describing a stock loan. So what Lummis and Gillibrand are doing in this bill now is just adding digital assets to this list of things that these loans can be about where no gain or loss shall be recognized. And currently it's a list of one thing, securities, which is actually many, many things, but they're adding securities plus digital assets. So you could do crypto loans, and if it meets these requirements, no gain or loss shall be recognized. In this next section, they're directing the Secretary of the Treasury, or of course, a delegate of the Secretary, to adopt guidance relating to certain things. They're like, yo, Janet Yellen, do the following things. Give us a classification of forks, airdrops, and similar subsidiary value as taxable contingent upon the affirmative claim and disposition of the subsidiary value by a taxpayer. This is important. So right now, we've got the situation where if you get an airdrop or you're holding coins in a chain that forks, you suddenly get these coins. You may have never asked for them. You may not even know you've gotten them. And there are these questions about how that's going to be taxed, with the consensus largely being that they're taxable pretty much immediately upon receipt, whether you even know you got them or not, or you have claimed them or you sold them. This says that those will be taxable contingent upon you affirmatively claiming them and disposing of them. So you have to actually claim these things and sell them, and then they're taxable. So they're saying, Jenny Yellen, give us some guidance on this. Next, they're saying, give us some guidance on merchant acceptance of digital assets and the tax treatment of payments and receipts. I really like this. But maybe most important for us in Cardano, give us guidance on treatment of digital asset mining and staking, including mining and staking rewards, in which income is not realized until disposition of the assets produced or received in connection with such activity. So the issue is, when we get staking rewards or mining rewards, but in the case of Cardano, staking rewards, that's income the second you receive it, whether you've sold it or not. You actually haven't made any fiat, but you've made some Cardano ADA staking rewards. So you owe taxes. You're kind of like forced to sell your ADA. You kind of have to sell it if you want to have fiat to pay your taxes. Here they're asking for guidance such that income is not actually realized until you sell the assets. So if we got guidance in accord with this subsection 3, it would say basically, hey, you don't have to pay taxes on your staking rewards until you actually sell your staking rewards. Here in the final version of the bill, they have this section, analysis of retirement investing in digital assets, basically by a million different parts of the government. In the earlier form of the bill that came out this morning, they just had this section that said, hey, go ahead and invest in digital assets with your retirement account, and that won't count as a distribution from your retirement account. That was important because you don't want any distributions to happen from your retirement account before you retire because they're generally going to be taxable. So you don't want if you don't want to, you're not going to want to buy crypto with your retirement account if that's going to count as a distribution of whatever you're using in your retirement account to like acquire those crypto assets. That's what the earlier version of the bill said. This version of the bill doesn't seem to have that section. It just says, oh, by the way, we're going to have a million different parts of the government analyze the possibility of retirement investing in digital assets. Next up, they've got a section that goes along with the earlier section on the sort of triggering of taxing of things like mining and staking. They say, in the case of a taxpayer who conducts digital asset mining or staking activities, those activities shall not be included in the gross income of the taxpayer until the taxable year of the disposition of the assets. So until you sell whatever you made staking or mining, you don't have to pay taxes on that. That's a great bill. We really need that, especially in Cardano with our staking. Next up is the important, probably the part of the bill that most people were most anxiously looking forward to. This is the securities and commodities treatment of crypto generally. These are really big issues. So I'm going to have to ask you to suspend any sense of confusion for the securities part. They're going to carve out this category in the securities section, and it's only going to become apparent why they're doing that when we get to the commodities section. So you're not totally going to understand why they're doing this in the securities section, but we're going to explain that in the commodities section. And it's actually pretty good. So they're going to carve out this category. They're going to call an ancillary asset in the securities section. They say an ancillary asset means an intangible, fungible asset that is offered, sold, or otherwise provided in connection with the purchase and sale of a security through an arrangement or scheme that constitutes an investment contract. So basically, an ancillary asset is going to be some kind of fungible asset, like a crypto asset that somebody is selling when they've already kind of violated the Howey test. They're already failing the Howey test because of something they've done. And they're also offering this crypto asset, but they're going to say, hey, we've got this special category now, ancillary asset. And even if you've already obviously violated the Howey test, we're going to have this other category, ancillary asset, for these little crypto assets you might be offering. And if you do this, if you've offered something that fits in this ancillary asset category and you meet certain other requirements, they've got all kinds of other little requirements here. But if you meet those requirements, you have to do periodic disclosure reports. So this is a big part of what the SEC does. All these companies that offer securities in the US end up being required to file these periodic reports. We've got annual reports, quarterly reports, special event reports, 10Ks, 10Qs, 8Ks. We've got a bunch of these reports they have to file when certain things happen. Some of them are periodic, some of them are special events, but they have to file these. And the SEC has a big system called Edgar, where they file all these reports. Down here under treatment of ancillary assets, they say, hey, if an asset you've been offering falls into this ancillary asset category and you're in compliance with the periodic disclosure requirements under subsection C, an ancillary asset provided by the issuer shall presumed to be a commodity. So now we can see they created this little carve out for ancillary assets so that they can classify that as a commodity, even though the Howey test has already been violated by the issuer. So this is important. But even these periodic reports come to an end. If we come down here down to termination of specific periodic disclosure requirements, the issuer can file a certification if the average daily aggregate value of all trading the applicable ancillary asset in all spot markets in the 12-month period preceding the date on which the certification is filed was not greater than 5 million, then they can file the certification to terminate the specific periodic disclosure requirements. Or if during the 12-month period preceding the date on which the certification is filed, neither the applicable issuer nor any entity controlled by the issuer engaged in entrepreneurial or managerial efforts that primarily determined the value of the ancillary asset. So if either of these two things are the case, they can file a certification to try to get their duty to file these periodic reports terminated. This is actually not quite as good as the version that was filed, that was in the bill that popped up this morning. Here in the earlier version of the bill, you can see that that was a slightly different provision, that part 2, the or part. This one has the same 12-month period preceding the date on which the certification is filed and says, neither the applicable issuer nor any person owning not less than 10% of any class or equity securities of the issuer engaged in entrepreneurial or managerial efforts that primarily determined the value of the ancillary asset. I like this better because it includes any person owning not less than 10% of any class of equity securities of the issuer. This seems to fit a little bit more of what we'd actually like to see, I think, in crypto. And that's because a person could be a legal person, like a corporation, or a natural person, like a human. But in the final version of the bill, you can see it just says, neither the applicable issuer nor any entity controlled by the issuer. And there's not this notion of a person, either legal person or natural person, who controls 10% of any class of equities of the issuer. So slightly different. This one just applies to entities. The other one applies to both types of persons. Then we get to the commodities section of the bill. So the important part of the commodities section of the bill is down here, jurisdiction. So they say the commission, and by the commission in this section, they mean the CFTC, shall have exclusive jurisdiction over any agreement, contract, or transaction involving a contract of sale of a digital asset in interstate commerce, including ancillary assets. So let me read that to you again. The CFTC will have exclusive jurisdiction over basically any transaction involving digital assets in interstate commerce, including this ancillary assets thing. Previous to this bill, I think we would have said with certainty that if it can be shown that you have violated the Howey test, you've probably got a security on your hands, and the CFT and the SEC is going to have jurisdiction over that, which pretty much nobody in crypto wants. Nobody in crypto wants to be regulated by the SEC, given what's happening with Ripple and all the rhetoric that's come out of Gary Gensler over the last little bit here. This says, nope, not the SEC. The CFTC shall have exclusive jurisdiction over these transactions involving not only digital assets, but also these ancillary assets, except, and this is why they went through the whole ancillary asset thing. They're saying the CFTC pretty much has jurisdiction over all of it, except that those periodic reports we talked about, those will still be provided to the SEC. And there's actually good reason for this. That good reason is that the SEC has that entire infrastructure to receive and publicly display those periodic reports. They already do this with the annual, quarterly, and special event reports in that Edgar system we talked about for all of the publicly companies who report to the SEC. So they've already got the entire infrastructure there. Might as well have these ancillary asset issuers. If they're going to be providing periodic reports, might as well do that for the SEC as well. This is kind of like the SEC's little pound of flesh. We knew they were going to get something. It's great. If they just end up getting this, this is fantastic. This is a huge win for crypto in general to end up under the CFTC, not the SEC. You can see up here in the definitions section, they also did a lot of amending of definitions in the Commodity Exchange Act to make sure that they were throwing the digital asset exchanges under the CFTC as well. So now you can understand why Coinbase, Kraken, and FTX are all very much in favor of this bill. They would very much rather be regulated by the CFTC than the SEC. Also, another funny little section down here is the fungibility requirement for CFTC jurisdiction. They say the commission shall only exercise jurisdiction over an agreement, contract, or transaction involving a contract of sale of a digital asset that is fungible, which shall not include digital collectibles and other unique digital assets. They don't want the CFTC getting in the art business. Apparently, they're like, hey, we're cool with you getting in the crypto business, but we don't want the same entity that is regulating orange juice concentrate. Here we go. Frozen concentrated orange juice to also be regulating art. We don't need the orange juice guys, the frozen orange juice guys, to be all over the art thing. So the CFTC not in the NFT art business, apparently. One really great change they did make from the original offering had to do with the exclusions from the exception. So the ancillary asset thing is basically like an exception from the definition of what's going to be a security. And then you got an exclusion, these exclusions from the exception. So you don't fit into the exclusion if you don't fit into the exception of ancillary asset if you fit one of the exclusions. So basically, you're not a security if you're an ancillary asset, but you can't be an ancillary asset if you fit one of these. And in the original bill, it included voting rights. It included these rights to interest, profits, debt or equity interest, liquidation rights, but it also said voting rights with respect to that entity. And then it became important that it was a business entity because we definitely want voting rights, even if the issuer already made a mistake, violated the Howey test. We want to be able to fit into this ancillary asset exception. And we didn't want to be kicked out if that ancillary asset allowed for governance in whatever the crypto thing is, whether it's a DAO or a blockchain or whatever it was. We definitely want voting rights. And you notice in the final version of the bill, it doesn't include this voting rights exclusion to the exception. Here you can see that same list in the final version of the bill that was published, and it doesn't include that same line item for voting rights. It includes the rest of the stuff and also adds any other financial interest in that entity. But I think this is really important because we want this exclusion. We want this exception. We don't want to be in one of these exclusions, all because of this section down here, treatment of ancillary assets. If you're in compliance with the periodic disclosure requirements and you have an ancillary asset, that ancillary asset shall be presumed to be a commodity. I think all of these crypto projects are going to want to be commodities, not securities in this context. Like I said, this is a 69-page bill. There are a lot of other things in this bill, including digital assets and bankruptcies, consumer protections, use of different versions of source code, depository institution issuance of stablecoins, treatment of China's digital RMB, sanctions compliance responsibilities with stablecoins, establishment of digital asset self-regulatory organizations. There's lots of other things in here. But overall, I think this bill reminds me of how good it feels to know you've got friends out there who can see the same vision of a better financial future for all of us, not just the super elite, not just the very wealthy and powerful, but a less dystopian financial future where your distance from the printing press doesn't ensure dystopian economic inequality. It feels good to know that we have policymakers out there who are striving for the same thing and understand that crypto might be the best path to that kind of future. I hope you're having a great week, and I will talk to you tomorrow.